Can a group that meets online make physical objects move at distant locations with psychokinesis and with statistically significant researched results? If so, how would they do it? Keep watching to find out. Book 3 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Emmy Vadnais, co-host with Jeffrey Mishlove. Our topic today is online group psychokinesis with my guest, James McClenon, who is a researcher and former sociology professor, a licensed clinical social worker, and civil engineer. He has been interviewed many times on New Thinking Aloud. Jim is author of 4 books: Deviant Science, The Case of Parapsychology, Wondrous Events, Foundations of Religious Belief, Wondrous Healing, Shamanism, Human Evolution, and the Origin of Religion, and The Entity Letters, a sociologist on the trail of a supernatural mystery. He is also co-author with Mohammad Kodiyarifard of An Iranian and American Veteran Exchange Stories and discuss Inner Peace. We Were 13. Jim is also author of the journal article An Online Group PK Experiment, Hypothesis Testing and Theory Development that was published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration that we'll be discussing today. If you enjoy this program, please like, subscribe, press the bell icon, and share. Jim is joining us from Chesapeake, Virginia. Now I'll switch over to the internet video. Welcome, Jim. It's lovely to be back with you on New Thinking Aloud today.
Well, thank you for having me.
You recently conducted online group psychokinesis experiments with fascinating results that we're going to discuss today. To get us started, what led you to conduct these experiments, and why did you focus specifically on psychokinesis?
I was a sociology professor, and I was very curious about anomalous experiences, and I'd gotten my dissertation covering the field of parapsychology, the sociology of parapsychology. So I'd interviewed all the parapsychologists in the United States and Europe. I'd come back and they'd sent me all these haunting cases. So I was doing haunting investigations in those days. And I wondered that the haunting people were telling anomalous experiences. And I wondered, what's the nature of them? How prevalent is that in the regular society? So I was having my anthropology students collect, unusual experience cases. So after doing this for year after year, I had like thousands of these cases, and I was able to categorize them in categories. And it was clear to me that this was affecting people's belief, that belief seemed to be evolving from experience. It wasn't the people's experience, wasn't people's belief that was creating experience. The experience was creating the belief. And I was surprised that almost all of these experiences were individual experiences, except for apparitions, which were collective experiences. But there was also a category of experiences which pertained to performances, like people visiting psychics and things like that. And I was doing research within the sociology of religion and wondering, how did religion begin? And it seemed like it was very much connected to these unusual experiences. People were believing in spirits. People who had the experiences were believing in spirits, souls, life after death, and magical abilities. So I was very interested in group experiences. A lot of people go to church, and they go to church every week, but that doesn't typically induce these extremely unusual experiences like apparitions, or the most common ones are apparitions and precognitive dreams. And also I hung out with the parapsychologists, but it seemed to me like the parapsychologists were studying something which was very unusual. They were studying performances. You bring a person into the laboratory and then you ask them to perform like a psychic. So that was a very unusual thing. And it seemed like they were just studying one tiny part of the elephant, that there's all the different pieces of the elephant involving these unusual experiences. And I read about this researcher, Kenneth Batchelador, who did group experiences with table tipping. The people come together, they put their hands on the table seems to move around. And Batchelador hypothesized that the first step to success involved artifacts. In other words, phenomena that weren't really paranormal, but the people were accidentally pushing the table around in the dark. And then that helped them overcome their fear of psi. He argued that fear of psi was a major obstacle to creating this group psychokinesis phenomena, because the people perceived the table was moving around by itself. Okay. So he would have the people gather together. They all put their hands on the table. The table would seem to move around. Then that would help them overcome their fear of psi and also overcome what he referred to as ownership resistance. In other words, the people have a natural propensity not to think that the phenomena is derived from their own behavior. To them, it seems like it's some exterior force. So I began communicating through the mail with Batchelador until his death in 1988. And I attempted to put together my own table tipping groups, because I'd also had done this SIRAT research, Society for Research on Rapport and Telekinesis. And that group was a table tipping group, and they did had very, very anomalous experiences, huge amount of phenomena. It's hard to trust people. I have to admit I was a bit skeptical of the whole thing. So I felt like if I could just do it myself, then I could believe, So I attempted 4 different groups, and we met for over 3 months and just really had not been very successful. But, Batchelador was still successful until his death. And then there are other groups which were successful, like the Phillips group in 1972. They were meeting in Toronto, and they created this fictitious story about Philip, a 1600 nobleman, and he remained silent when his mistress was burned at the stake as a witch. And then he felt remorse. And according to the fictitious story, he committed suicide. So they wanted to summon forth this fictitious spirit, and were unsuccessful until they communicated with Batchelador. Batchelador suggested that they use more of a seance type environment, have a relaxed atmosphere. And then the Phillips group were successful. So I thought, if only I could do that, I would be successful. And a lot of people all around even within the stories I was gathering, there were people who were had successful table tipping experiences, and also experiences with psychics. It just wasn't that common. So my experience is what is very, very difficult. Batchelador assured me it's not that difficult, but for me, it seemed almost impossible, But then as time passed, I began encountering more and more cases. And one pathway to success would be to have some person who had a propensity for anomalous experience. And I would bet there's a lot of people listening to this program right now who fall in that category. There's probably a lot of people who have had a lot of unusual experiences. So we're all in this together. So I thought, with the invention of the internet, it becomes possible to assemble people who have this propensity. And so 2019, I put together a group, and we all met, and I really didn't know what to expect. My hope was that we could replicate the Phillips experiment. We'd come together, we'd create some kind of story, and we'd all agree upon it, and then we would start having unusual experiences. I wasn't sure how it would manifest, but you got to do an experiment. It's a sociological field experiment. Now, I've had a lot of problems with parapsychologists with criticism saying, "Oh, your group isn't adequately controlled. Don't have scientific safeguards." But the purpose isn't to prove that the phenomena occurs. The idea is to get the phenomena to occur, to experience it. Because as a sociologist of religion, I was curious, what makes people believe in this stuff. And the theory is that experience leads to belief, not that belief generates the experience, but the experience leads to belief, because a lot of people are skeptical and they still have the experiences.
Right. It seems that if somebody has like a spontaneous precognitive dream or some form of telepathy or maybe even a near-death experience, but something where they have an experience that opens them up to something greater than what we consider just this physical world, makes them perhaps more open to this as well.
And once I started collecting these stories, then people would come to me and tell me stories. And some of the people had many, many experiences. It's clear to me the experiences are not distributed normally. It isn't a normal bell-shaped curve. Some people have a lot of experiences, and there's a large percentage of people who have none and who are highly skeptical. There's a kind of tradition that's involved with these groups. The group forms, they start meeting for a number of months, they don't have any experiences, then suddenly the phenomena starts occurring, and people will hear raps coming out of the floor and the table moves around. So our group met, and the very first meeting we had a poltergeist event. This woman's plague mask, which was on her mantelpiece, it fell to the floor. And I thought, that's what's going on. This is too much to imagine. But I had a collection of people, and many of them had had many experiences. And we started meeting, and things seemed like they were, we were developing the rapport, which my group in Missouri, that was a key feature, was developing rapport within the group. And it seemed that people were having more experiences as a result of the meeting. Some people, it seemed like every week someone had a new story to tell. So it was an exciting time, but we just had that one poltergeist event, and then other people were having things happen in their homes individually, and the meeting seemed to increase that phenomena. But, we started having conflicts within the group. People, they couldn't agree about where we should go with this, or what story we should follow. And people were afraid of demons. Maybe demons would come and interfere with this. I do a lot of meditation. I meditate before an image of the Buddha. But we assembled other statues and talked about it. But it seems like modern people there don't have the same kind of attention span that people had in the spiritualist era. It's hard to get people to come regularly. And there are conflicts, so people would drop out, and I'd finally recruit new people. But I had one woman who was actually very successful as a professional psychic. She suggested trying to get pinwheels to turn, okay? And so you could go online, and there's instructions how to make a pinwheel. You take a piece of aluminum foil and fold it into quarters and unfold it and put it on a needle point sticking to an eraser. And it sits there. And I read books about how you can train yourself to have psychokinetic ability, and started practicing with this thing. But it wouldn't turn. It wasn't. And I kept it in my meditation room, and I kept the door open. Every time I walked past there, I'd look at it, and it wasn't turning. I put my hands around it, which is supposed to get it turned, but it wasn't turning.
And just for the listeners, I know when I first heard the term pinwheel, my mind thought of like the pinwheel that you might blow on as a kid or you see in people's lawns, but this is a different type of pinwheel.
This is a pinwheel which is designed for psychokinesis experiments, because when you blow on it, it doesn't turn. It just jiggles around. It's not aerodynamically designed to turn with wind currents. But it is very sensitive to air currents, and there's a lot of skeptical. If you Google and read about it, I think you'll encounter skeptics who've done research, and heat convection currents can cause it to move around if the air currents are rising up. It's not perfectly. I mean, you're making it by hand. It's not a perfectly designed not to respond to air currents. So there is a possibility of it turning. I set up a cell phone camera so the group we were meeting on with a Zoom group meeting, okay. And I set up a cell phone camera so that the group could look at the pinwheel while we were meeting. And during that session, the pinwheel started to turn. So that's kind of surprising.
Oh, yeah. And Jim, didn't you also put tape over your vent so that you wouldn't get any air movement?
That's later because we're just doing an experiment. And I would sit in the meditation room every day meditating, and it wouldn't turn. The heating system would come on and the air would come out, and it wouldn't turn, It didn't turn. But I talked to skeptics. Oh, you have to cover that over. As soon as we started getting the group effect, then people were saying, oh, well, you have to cover the air vents. Okay, so I taped over the air vents, and then, oh, you can't have the door open. So I would close the door. I'd go in there, I'd set up the camera, I'd close the door. But then you thought that there were people in the group who were skeptical. They're saying, well, you're going in there, you're disturbing the air. Okay. All right. So I would go in there a half hour ahead of time. That gives it air time to calm down. Actually, if you go in there and close the door very rapidly, it jiggles around. But then after about 60 seconds, it stops, Well, so the second week, it started turning immediately when the first person arrived. And I forget who it was. I think it may have been Melanie, but I had another friend. He also has had a lot of experience. I think it could be my other friend. It's a startling thing. It's hard to accept because there is a possibility of air currents, and you have heat we're on the second floor. There could be stuff going on. But Bachelor, in his research, he discovered that if you tighten your experimental controls, that the phenomena goes away. Okay. And since the beginning of psychical research, people have observed that, you try and film the poltergeist phenomena, you can't get it. It doesn't work. There's a hiding quality. I delved into that in some of my early publications. The title of one book was Wondrous Events. The phenomena seems to be hiding from documentation. And in the 1970s, 1980s, the parapsychologists wanted to have some kind of proof that psychokinesis occurred. And so far, they have been unable to do that. And some of my friends, like Masuaki Kyoto, metal bender, he's done a lot of metal bending, but they have never generated conclusive proof that this phenomena occurs. Perfect evidence. And there's been so many attempts, and I've attempted.
And there's also spoon bending. Many people are able to do spoon bending.
And it's been captured on film. I was with Masuaki Geto in Japan, and I had this spoon, and I super glued a nitronol wire, which if it bends and you heat it, it'll return to its normal state. Some people say if it bends psychokinetically, it won't return to a normal state. So I did an experiment with Masuaki, and he bent the spoon. And I'd done kind of like a control experiment ahead of time, and I found it had to bend a certain amount beyond a certain area before I figured I will believe, because it could get deformed slightly just naturally from being bent. So anyway, he had the spoon, and he psychokinetically bent it. We put it on the table, and the darn thing straightened up just to the amount which I had determined ahead of time would constitute good evidence. So I had, for a while there, I had was wonderful evidence, but now the phenomena has this hiding quality. Okay, is what my hypothesis is.
At the same time, though, with this study, as we continue with this conversation, people will find that you did find some statistical significance.
Oh, yeah.
You were able to demonstrate some interesting phenomena.
So we got the pinwheel would start turning, and I'd take my camera and I open the door very carefully, and I'd go and try and capture it, but it would stop, So we weren't capturing on film. So we try this again and again. And finally we were able to show we were capturing it. It would turn, and we had videos of it stopping turning. So I presented that before the Parapsychological Association. But there's people who are, they just kind of blow it off. I mean, it could be fraud or whatever, So, but one of my participants, Melanie, she said, well, you should get one of these cameras, an active a motion activated camera. So I did. I bought a blink camera from Amazon and I set it up, and it wouldn't turn afterwards. It stopped turning, you know. But then after a few weeks, it just started turning, and then we started having activations. So that's when I started counting. The camera was on all the time, 24 hours a day, and so we were counting. We were seeing how much the pinwheel started turning when we weren't meeting them too.
With your group, was it basically the intention to have these pinwheels turn in general? Was that really the intention, and you were just experimenting with different ways to see if they would begin moving?
The group was meeting with the intention of creating psychokinetic phenomena.
Mm-hmm.
We seemed to create this voice phenomena. You know, it seemed like we were getting whispering and voices, and one time we heard a dog barking, but it wasn't giving much of a message. So this was just kind of an attempt to give the phenomena a chance to express itself. So yeah, we were hoping that the turning would occur, but the purpose of I'm doing what's known as a sociology participant observation experiment. I'm taking part in the group and I'm observing what's happening in the group. Okay, and I'm writing notes. I take notes every session, and we're writing down what happens in the group. So we had this camera, and it was activating, so I could count the number of activations during our 2-hour session, and it seemed to be varying. Okay, and then I could compare that to when the group wasn't meeting, and it was very clear. At the beginning, it was very clear that when the first person arrived, then the thing started turning. Okay, that happened about 2 or 3 times. Then it started turning a little bit before the first person arrived. So that's another, okay, all right. And then it seemed to be turning in response to what we were saying. In other words, someone would say something, it would turn immediately, particularly on certain conversation topics, like psychical research. If we talk about psycho, it would turn. Or anomalous experience. Or doing a psychic reading. We had people who were psychic, so we were doing readings for each other, psychic readings. Or a category which I refer to as occult traditions. The group were interested in all manner of things, like dowsing or visits from UFO, UFO visits and those kind of, all different types of these. And the Pinwheels seemed to like that. So the method that I'm using is a sociological research method where we really start off without hypotheses, but then the hypotheses emerge as a result of our observation. So I was able to form the hypothesis that when the group was meeting, we would expect there to be more activations of the camera than when it was not meeting. That's what our first hypothesis. Another hypothesis is that when we have certain conversation topics, it should be faster turning than when we're talking about a miscellaneous topic. So those are 2 primary hypotheses, and it's a quantifiable experiment. It's possible to do controlled experiments every time, but Batchelor said, well, if you do really well controlled experiments, the phenomenon will go away. So I figured, well, I'll set up the camera while the people are not meeting. Everything will be exactly like a meeting, and I'll just ignore it. I'll go downstairs and we'll see what happens. Okay, so I was in the kitchen with my wife, and I forget what we were doing. I think we were making popcorn or something. This alcohol bottle on the top of the refrigerator, our backs were turned, but it fell off. This is what we think happened. It hit the counter. Half the cap broke off. It fell to the floor. The other half of the cap broke off, and then it popped upright, standing upright. And I turned around, and there it is. The alcohol's still in the bottle. There's this one little drop on the counter, so it obviously hit the counter. Half the cap was on the counter. The other half was on the floor, and it looks like a poltergeist event. And I went upstairs, and sure enough, the camera had activated. The pinwheel had been turning while this bottle was busy not breaking itself, but the cap broke its cap off, and the liquid hadn't spilled somehow, but yet it had flown all around.
You can hear the bottle, the noises it makes in that video of the pinwheel. You hear it in the background.
Yeah, the camera records the sound, and so you hear the 3 thumps, and exactly what we heard when we were in the kitchen. During that same time period, the pinwheel was becoming very, very active in the middle of the night at 1 o'clock in the morning and 2 o'clock in the morning, and it was actually turning faster at those times than during our regular meetings. So it was as if and my actual hope was that by doing this experiment, I can gain an understanding of what the phenomena is. Okay, because there's a lot of questions. It's not a philosophical issue. This is an empirical issue because we've got a quantitative method of determining how active it is, and we can also look at the speed of the pinwheel when it's turning. So those are the 2 variables that we can quantify. So it's as if it's telling me it doesn't really need the group. It can create the phenomena without the group. Okay. So of course that's opposed to my hypothesis. And actually during this entire series of experiments, there's evidence in opposition to our hypotheses. So I could formally create those hypotheses, those 2 hypotheses, that a group meeting facilitates turning, the conversation topic makes for faster turns. And so we did an experiment for an entire year. We kept track of the pinwheels, and I had to create the control group had to be exact same time as our meetings, because it could be that the indoor-outdoor temperature made a difference, and maybe something about the nighttime, the air's cooler outside. Though when you create hypotheses, when you create a skeptical hypothesis, you can actually evaluate with this method, like if it should be, and this is my early hypothesis. It seemed like when the air outside was colder that we have more pinwheel activity. That was an early hypothesis because the air convection currents, is passing through the window pane, so there should be some kind of flow within the room. So I'd start each experiment and I'd look at the difference between indoor and out, and if it was a great big difference, I'd say, well, we would predict there should be a lot of pinwheel activations. Well, that hypothesis wasn't confirmed in the slightest. It didn't work at all, But our hypothesis about the group meeting, yes, that worked out.
Yeah.
Strongly confirmed by the statistics.
Can you tell us what the results were?
I can tell the results, and I have the statistics. Actually, I have the statistics for the latest experimental series. But we could set the level of significance at 0.05 for your p-value, okay? And our level of success far surpassed that with regard to the difference between when the group was meeting and when they weren't meeting.
Can you explain to people who are not familiar with statistics and statistical research numbers and values so that they know what that means?
Let's suppose that there is no psychokinetic effect and that the pinwheel is turning randomly, okay? It's possible that it could just accidentally be turning strongly when we're meeting. There's that possibility. And so using statistics, we can calculate what's the probability, how improbable is the result that we obtained when the group was meeting as compared when they were not, the difference between that and the number when we were not meeting.
So the p-value means probability value?
Probability value. Mm-hmm. I'd have to look up those actual numbers from my research, but it's highly significant. It's less than 1 out of 100 chance that this result occurred by chance. Now, of course, it could occur by chance. That's why you need to repeat the experiment to see if you get the same result again. Okay. So we did the experiment. We did this a number of experiments, and you can put up a chart, and it shows our findings over the last number of years. And you'll see there's you don't actually have to do a statistical evaluation to see that there's a big difference. Mm-hmm. The number of activations when we were meeting and the number of activations when we weren't meeting is a very major difference. Now, there's a lot of times where there's no difference because it's zero. It didn't turn at all when we were meeting, and it didn't turn at all when we were not meeting. And there's a few cases where it turned more when we were not meeting than when we were meeting. But in almost all the cases, it turned more when we were meeting. It's a very, very strong relationship, surprisingly strong. Mm-hmm. And so I thought there's got to be an explanation for this. And so we closed off the vents. I'd go in the room, I'd close off the door. There's a carpet. There's no air current can get underneath the door. Now, and there's a mobile in the room so that if there are air currents, that mobile will turn. When you walk into the room, the mobile starts turning because you're disturbing the air. So we had a very controlled situation. I installed a thermometer in the room, it could monitor the outdoor temperature and the indoor temperature, so we could figure out the difference. I kept track of that for every session, for session after session after session. And after, months and months and months, we had this very strong, statistically significant difference. And then, my wife and I do a lot of traveling, so we'd leave the house, and the house would be completely empty. And then it would act really funny. It would activate the camera, and the pinwheels weren't turning. It would do that, and sometimes it would cause the pinwheels to turn, but the camera wouldn't activate. And so I refer to this as trickster effects. It seemed like it was showing me that it could do these funny things. It could do strange things. And so we did a two experimental series and replicated that, the difference between the group and the non-group. We did that was replicated 2 times. And then we looked at the data overall with this conversation topic. Now, it was very clear to the group members that our emotions were a factor. When someone told an emotional story, the pinwheels would turn. Mm-hmm. So I thought, well, I'll be able to quantify. I'll say, this is an emotional story and this is not an emotional story. But I wasn't able to devise a good way of doing that. I thought maybe, like, for example, it seemed like it would turn when there's a mention of a death, a deceased person, it would turn. So I said, whenever the word death is uttered, well, count that as but that wasn't a good way of emotionality. Sometimes people would talk about death in a totally dispassionate manner. It seemed like it was turning when you mentioned particular people, like Hans Bender, a deceased European parapsychologist. It started turning. I knew him, I knew a lot of these people, and many of them are deceased. I'm getting up in years. A lot of my friends are no longer here, and it seemed like it was turning. And so we thought, well, maybe we can get it to turn by calling the spirits to come, But that didn't seem to work. Sometimes it would work, but sometimes not. It wasn't. I have no faith that we were that successful. Now, some people are more successful than others. We had one participant has a strong. In fact, you'll hear his voice in this and see him in our site. Boris has been successful in getting the pinwheel to turn on command. It had a very, very successful session. But when I asked him to do it again, he said, "Oh, I don't think so. I don't think we can do that."
To really imagine what that, wrap our mind around it, and maybe after we die, we are able to do that. We think in way more dimensions, not only 4th or 5th, but how many dimensions there are, and suddenly we will be able to.
We've tried purposefully talking about anomalous experience. In fact, I would like to invite you to come to one of our sessions and tell you have had some very powerful, unusual experiences. And yes.
Oh, me.
Yeah.
I would be honored to join one of your online group sessions.
We'll have you tell the story, and then we'll just see what happens.
Oh, I would be honored to do that. Thank you for the invitation, Jim.
You might react to that. It's certain people it loves, and it really, really does turn. But my experience is that oftentimes the people become afraid because there's a kind of power to the phenomena, which is disturbing for some people. It's for us participants, it's a very, very real thing. It is as the pinwheels are participating in our group. They're like part of our group.
Yes, I think many people are quite sensitive to what people might perceive as, quote, good or bad spirits. In fact,
Yeah.
On your altar, you have statues and images of many different spiritual beings.
We have.
I think that's something that your group wanted to create, or how did that come about to have all of those different images on your altar?
The early group was expressing a lot of concern about demonic forces, and some of them had very, very negative poltergeist experiences, almost demonic experiences, and they didn't want that again. And one woman was a professional psychic, and she had received bad vibration. Her clients seemed to shed negativity on her. So they wanted me to pray. And so we'd say a prayer, and I introduced, and then we had a Jewish participant, we had Christians. So I had a Star of David. We had a Muslim participant. So and when I was looking for trickster phenomena, we have Nasruddin, an Islamic trickster figure, and we had a Guatemalan saint who was known as a trickster Catholic monk, and there's a certain frivolity is important. Joking seems to be beneficial for this, so we're trying to have a light atmosphere, but we have an image of Jesus, like a kind of a special shroud from Italy is on our altar, and the Madonna's there, and St. Francis, and Confucius, and the Chinese god of war, and we're protected, and I feel very confident, and I meditate there every day. So
I know we're going to share more about your experiment and your sessions and some of the more experiences that your participants had. What do you think is going on? What is influencing these pinwheels? Is it the group's consciousness? Do you think it's some other entity or entities? What do you think's happening? Or what did your participants, did they come to any conclusions?
So I'm a sociologist, so I interview people in a group, and I'm documenting what their opinions are, and I concur with all their opinions. When people express an opinion, I say that's a good opinion, and I would very much like to get the phenomena to manifest, and I have to admit the phenomena seems to have its own. I use the word phenomena because I would like to be a scientist. I'm a social scientist. But at the same time, I feel like I'm not really a parapsychologist. They seem to have a very secular orientation. And Bachelor himself, we had a lot of discourse about this. He was a firm belief that it's the group consciousness. Within my sociological tradition, the sociologist Emile Durkheim has the opinion that it's the group consciousness that creates the phenomena. But I think in more recent months, it's the thing which is interacting with us doesn't coincide with our desires. It doesn't seem to. There's a reflection. It seems to reflect us. So I think all those things are happening. We have a group consciousness process, and we have some kind of exterior forces coming. And why not be open-minded and allow the phenomena to manifest in the way that it feels? My hope is that it will manifest in a way which will increase our understanding of it, and I think that's happening. I think that our theories are evolving in reflection of the data that we're getting. Mm-hmm. And I'm a sociologist of religion, so I'm very curious. Why did ancient peoples evolve the notion of religion? And I would argue they gathered together in groups. They had group experiences, and those group experiences led them to believe in shamanic ideologies, spirit, souls, life after death, and magical abilities.
It's worth noting that on one hand, the phenomena seem to kind of have its own mind, if you will. At the same time, you mentioned that one of the participants was able to get the pinwheels to spin, to rotate on command.
Maybe on 2 occasions it has done that. And actually, there's been many occasions where I set up the experiment, then I want to test the sound system. So I say testing, and then it starts turning right immediately, as if the voice is like it's voice active. Pinwheel seems like it's voice activated, but then when I try to get it to go again, it doesn't happen. For some reason, the parapsychologists seem to demand that it act like a pet dog, they want it's supposed to perform on command. But one of our participants, Jeremy, he pointed out maybe it's doing experiments with us. It's doing something to see how we will react. That could easily be valid. It's trying to understand us.
We are spirits in a material world, and on one hand, in many ways, maybe we are having psychokinesis on our world and we're not always aware of it.
Maybe our consciousness is constructing reality. And there's some people who believe consciousness constructs the material world.
Right.
So there's all different things. So it's an ongoing experiment. Now, we replicated 2 times for this group experiment. Both worked one time, then another series, another year, another replication of those 2 hypotheses. And now this present series, as we've got another replication. So we have those particular hypotheses we've replicated a number of times, and they're controlled experiments. In other words, yes, it could be possible that air currents, that the window isn't sealed closed. If you're going to be a doubter, you should demand that the pinwheels be enclosed in some kind of vacuum container, double sealed or something like that. But we've actually tried putting a plastic dome over the pinwheels, and they don't turn. The other ones turn. And then we tried turning over the dome, so there's opening at the top, and then we got a huge amount of turning. And it became some of a problem because I have to document it. I have to take so many notes. There's turning just all the time, and every hour counting the number of turns is just too tedious. So we tried tightening up the controls, and then putting a glass dome, and then they stopped turning. So that supports the hypothesis that maybe the cameras are generating heat, and that could cause turning in some fashion. But if you blast them with the heat, in and of itself doesn't make them turn. We've tried all manner of experiments, putting candles around them, and that creates all kinds of chaos. But one time, the candle just started burning down real rapidly, real anomalously. The whole candle burnt down in 1 hour.
Really?
And another time, the candle was waving around like there's some kind of tornado in the room. The pinwheels were completely still. Another time, the pinwheels were turning real strongly. The candle was completely still. And then we tried watching smoke flowing through, and of course, if it were air convection, the smoke should be flowing through, but no, it just flows. If you're going to be skeptical, you should test those hypotheses too. But that isn't actually how parapsychology works. If there's a skeptical explanation, they say, well, then it's got to be the skeptical explanation. So you've got to preclude all the skeptical explanations. But Bachelor found that seems to preclude the phenomena. But I don't know. And actually right now we're down this most recent series. We've had a major decline in the phenomena. And it could be that my presentations before the Parapsychological Association has caused that decline, because I was presented last summer and we have this major decline afterwards. So I don't know. We'll see. Perhaps there's people who are interested in this, and maybe we'll be able to recruit new members. And some people have a knack for this. It'd be fun to see what happens with new people.
Can we take a moment and just review when the pinwheels rotated more rapidly?
I'm turning to this particular slide that I had, previous 6-day average versus experimental activations, and I have 108 experiments altogether during my entire series of experimentation. And so when you look at this data, it looks like around the 5th or 6th or 7th experiment, then the phenomena kind of mushroomed. And the number of activations when we weren't meeting also mushroomed. at that period of time. We had a very high level of non-experimental activations, a very high level, twice as many experimental activations. So that helped us achieve the statistical significance. Then it declined very, very rapidly. Then we had another burst of phenomena. We had a burst of extremely high number of non-experimental activations, one experiment. Okay. Then we had a very fallow period. Then we had another one of these bursts, and then it was of this, not this particular experimental series, but the year before, and those experiments we had an incredibly high number of activations. Mm-hmm. We had over 220 activations during a 3-hour period.
So it was when you were meeting with the group, there were more activations, and also when there were certain topics. Is that right?
Yes.
Of conversation. And can we just review the certain topics of conversation? Yeah.
These topics were designed through experiments and through our observation. Then we created the hypothesis, then we test the hypothesis. So the hypothesis is that one topic would be psychical research, if we talked about psychical research. So that includes a realm of things that the parapsychologists are interested in, ESP and PK, and also reincarnation and life after death, and all these topics fall in the realm of parapsychology. And so the Pinwheels seemed to be interested in that. Now, it could be that I'm interested in it. I recognize that a lot of this could be a reflection of me, since I'm the one who is at every single session. Okay. Another topic that they seem to be interested in is occult traditions, and particular occult traditions. Okay. And it could be that one of our participants is interested in it. They seem to be particularly interested in this notion. There's a Lakota Sioux Native American practitioner who talks about the visitors from the star people. Okay. So the idea maybe visitors from outer space planted seeds of humankind, or that we interact with them. And so they were interested in that idea. And it could be and I'm interested in human evolution myself. It could be that the star people affected human. All this is these are occult traditions, And also we have Asian traditions and Buddhist traditions and Hindu traditions. A lot of times they're interested in those ideas.
And also laughter.
Yeah. Now, that was one of our hypotheses, but as time changes, we fail to replicate that. Oftentimes, you have a hypothesis and then it seems to stop. Like, I do these relaxation exercises and meditation exercises. And when I first stopped doing it, the Pinwheels was very, very clear demarcation. When I start we're all quiet our minds and we relax our body, and the Pinwheels would stop. They like to participate. And then when I stopped the exercise, then they would start turning again. Very, very clear demarcation. But then when I started Janet, she liked to do imagery exercises, and they seemed to like to turn. They liked that. They would turn during the exercise. So it's as if you're dealing with a personality, and the personality is not always the same. It's like a human is not always consistent. Sometimes they are up and sometimes they're down, like that. I don't know. I really don't know. I'm just doing the experiment. We're talking about this experimental series. Now, here we are around experiment number 85. We've had a major decline. Recently, we've had a major, major decline effect. Mm-hmm. The Pinwheels, and there's been many weeks where we have 0 activations, and also 0 activations when we're not meeting. Now, if there is all these air currents getting into the window, why aren't they still doing it? And then originally I had the hypothesis that February was the very strongest month, but here we went through last February, we weren't getting hardly any activations at all, and it was very cold outside. So your skeptical theories don't really hold water, but that doesn't stop people from, they like them. Some people really, really like the skeptical orientation. And, also the orientation of it's got to be spirits, But if it is spirits, there's such a lack of consistency. But spiritualism has the same problem. The mediums there's no replicable experiments involved with mediumship. They're unable to perform on demand.
Did you find that when the analytical thinking of the group decreased, that they moved more?
Oh, yes. Looking through the data of my interaction with the Surratt group, their table tipping group in Missouri, I found when I was present, the phenomena seemed to decline. Okay? And also when another researcher, William Edward Cox, the phenomena seemed to decline when he was present. I'm an analytical thinker, and my presence seemed to thwart the phenomena. Now, and I've now surrounded myself with people who are powerful psychoconducive people, and some of them are having poltergeist phenomena at their houses. Boris in particular, I don't think a week goes by that he doesn't. Very few weeks go by that he doesn't have something going on in his house, and it seemed to rub off on me, and it was hard for me to accept. It seems like you can thwart the phenomena by your analytical thinking, but the phenomena took unusual forms, so I wasn't sure whether it's paranormal or not, and I came to realize the Bachelor was onto something. The artifacts seem to overcome your analytical thinking. For example, I was backpacking, and I was sleeping in my hammock, and I had my light out in the middle of the night, and I fell out of my hand, and it fell through. There's an entrance way through the hammock, and it fell onto the ground. I searched all over the place for that light, and it was gone. And in the morning, I searched. It was gone. I took a photograph of the surrounding area because it just seemed so strange. Then I found that light in the bottom of my backpack later that afternoon. How did it get there? Well, it could be. Could it have fallen? It would have to somehow flown sideways because that wasn't underneath the opening. But maybe. So there's always like a loophole. You can explain the experience away, but after a while, your analytical strategies don't seem to work. It's happening too much. Another occasion, I was backpacking and my watch disappeared. Earlier in the morning I said, I'm really spaced out. This cold weather's really getting to me. It's like I'm outside of space and time. The next time I looked at my watch was gone. I thought, wow, that's like psychokinesis. But then later I found my watch within the backpack, and I thought, well, it must be, maybe I reached in the back, maybe it hooked on something, and that somehow detached the watch. I mean, you're able to come up with a theory. It's like a loophole, and then that allows phenomena to occur. So I had a series of experiences of sometimes, things seem to disappear. I look around, I search. Then I'd find the object is in plain sight. It's been in plain sight the whole time. That was happening again and again and again. So I can't be as critically thinking. For me, it's not that unusual. It's something that's quite possible, you see. And then that was followed by this burst of activity here in the middle of my experiment. I had this huge burst of activity. So perhaps my attitude could explain that burst. But I don't think that I'm the center of the universe. That's another theory. I don't think so. I think that there's all these other processes, and I think the group is they're marvelous people, and I love them to pieces.
Oh, that is so sweet. You had other participants who had anomalous experiences in their homes.
Actually, there's been a large number of poltergeist events that people have reported in their homes, yes. And some of them are very well documented, surprisingly documented. For example, Melanie had the experience of this black glove appearing on the floor in front of the door that led to her laundry room. And she went back and looked at, she had a motion-activated camera, and the camera actually caught the appearance of this black glove underneath the door of the laundry room. And then the next day she found it in the center of the floor. And then she found that the glove was absolutely soaking wet. And this black glove is exactly the same type that she had sent to her friend Janet up in Pennsylvania for Janet's mother's funeral. And both Janet and Melanie are very, This is the mother was very well known to Melanie. So that links the glove to this deceased lady, and the glove was wet, and that might be attributed to the flooding which was occurring right in that part of Pennsylvania. So we actually have that on video, and you can see first the pets come into the room, a dog comes in the room. Right before Melanie enters the room, the glove appears underneath the doorway. She does not see it till the next day. But then she did a little experiment, tried to see what would happen if she wet the glove herself and put it in the laundry room, and it dries out very quickly in that laundry room. So it's kind of anomalous that why is it still wet? Why is it so sopping wet when she found it? But it seems to be tied, like in many other phenomena, to a deceased person.
And what did she make of that experience?
She was disturbed. It was a little bit frightening for her, because even though she's a professional psychic, these kind of things don't happen all the time. Mm-hmm. But she sent me the glove, and that's gloves on her altar, and also the glass bottle, the bottle that fell off the refrigerator. I tried an experiment to see what would happen if I pushed that over the edge, and it's shattered. So we have that part of the shattered bottle and that glove, and that's on our altar to kind of commemorate those memorable poltergeist events. Wow. There's been a lot of poltergeist phenomena.
So that glove also is a type of apport.
Yes, it would seem, yes.
Well, going back to what you said about when you started getting this decline effect, you said that you presented at the Parapsychological Association. Do you have any hypotheses about why that happened? Or do you think that the consciousness of the other parapsychologist and then them observing it with like the observer effect or collapsing a wave might have impacted your experiments?
Yes, there's theories. The parapsychologists have theories. They have what's known as the observer effect. The observer seems to influence the experimental outcome. Some people have greater propensity than others, and so they're successful researchers. Chuck Honerton had a great deal of success. Charlie Tart had a lot of success. J.B. Ryan had a lot of success. There's certain people who have a lot of success, and other people can't seem to have success. So the observer seems to be a factor, and we have this observer effect. And then somehow the parapsychologists have observed the decline effect. That's almost one of the few consistent things which they have uncovered. The phenomena seems to be occurring very strongly, and then it's declined. So now we're having the decline effect, but it's kind of like like flowers in the springtime. They come up, they blossom. And there's maybe perhaps a kind of natural cycle to this kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Then the original Surratt group in Missouri in the 1982, Ed Cox started presenting his things, trying to present the things. They blocked him from presenting them very much. But then that had a powerful effect. The phenomena was never as strong afterwards. It seemed to have a decline. It occurs in hidden ways that can be possibly explained.
It is quite fascinating, and at the same time, if people are going around and moving objects with their minds, it could create a lot of chaos as well.
Yes, disruption of normal reality. There's a very strong stigma associated with psychical research, and it's affected my career. It's affected a lot of other people's careers. Disrupting normal reality is very, very bad, and it's actually like a sister discipline to psychosis. I was very curious in trying to understand the nature of consciousness. So I actually went back to graduate school and got a degree in social work and became a psychiatric social worker.
I'm getting that echo again, Jim. I wonder if it's the trickster joining us.
Yeah, I have had many, many problems with the trickster interfering with my computer.
Have you? Okay. Okay, sorry for the interruption, Jim. I'm so sorry.
Well, if you capture some of the echo, then include it in the program, because that has been a major problem. In fact, last summer I thought that maybe the phenomena would completely block me from presenting. And I'm thinking I probably won't present this year because there's, I think I would rather have the phenomena. The field of parapsychology has a lot of difficulty making progress because because part of science is this critical thinking business. And it seems to be it's really less scientific to not engage in critical thinking. If you think about it, that's not scientific attitude.
If we can just go back to what you were saying before we were having the echo, and we do have echo cancellation on, and you had changed your microphone settings, so we were fine before.
I just think we should take a step back and think about what's the meaning of the phenomena and what's in our lives. And I would argue and also speculate, and also using my intuition, I think there's probably people watching this, and some of them are experiencing some emotional distress, a lot of problems. There's probably some people are depressed and some people are very anxious. And so the phenomena is really, we shouldn't be even using that term, should we? But the unknown force or whatever it is, rather than being a subject of scientific explanation, I think it's kind of available for us to figure out pathways to recovery, and so I offer the suggestion that those who are listening to this and they're seeing here we're producing, the pinwheels are turning, but that's kind of a trivial thing. What's really important is figuring out what you might do to help yourself, and so engaging in some kind of meditation practice would be the way. And I my own self, I had gone through some major things. Here's a book about an Iranian-American veteran exchange stories and discuss inner peace. I talked with my Iranian friend. He fought in the Iran-Iraq War. I was in the Vietnam War. And there's a lot of people probably listening to this who have had very problematic childhoods. So yes, there's pathways that we can follow, and you can recover. It's not that. It's as easy as your breath. In Islam, they say that God is as close as your own breath.
That's beautiful. Thank you for that encouragement. Yeah, Jim, you and I had a conversation about that book, and I'll link to that interview in the upper right corner of the screen. We also did talk about your wondrous healing as well, and I'll link to that interview as well in the upper right corner of the screen for people who might want to go and watch that.
Well, let's just talk about it just for a second. So when I interviewed all these shamanic practitioners all through Asia, through Korea, Japan, Okinawa, Taiwan, Thailand, People's Republic of China, I did not see huge amounts of psychic phenomena. Okay. But what I did see was like a performance, remarkable trance performances, and offering a suggestion. So that's what I was really trying to do, just offer the suggestion. It's possible to recover, and just that suggestion will trigger some people to start thinking, because there's things you can do that you could help yourself. If you're a lonely person, there's ways of seeking friendship. If you're in abusive relationships, maybe you should stop. If you have an alcohol problem, there's programs. If you're depressed, you could seek therapy, or there's a lot of self-help ideas which are available to you. All different types of meditation, and then different ways of developing friendships, finding people to talk with, and of course, traditional therapy is a resort and beneficial for a lot of people.
Yes, those are wonderful pieces of advice.
People who are prone to anomalous experience are they're special people, and they have a special pathway. And so if you're one of those people, you need to figure out what's your pathway. And by following that pathway, that's a pathway towards recovery. And you may end up being a wounded healer. In other words, you're still experiencing the wounds of your childhood, for example, but you're a recovering person and you're happier, And so that's really, rather than seeking some kind of ecstatic happiness, seek to become happier. Small steps might be the way to go.
Thank you for that wonderful advice, Jim. And I know you have many years of experience actually helping people with their mental health. And I also just want to ask, how do you feel your experiments, how do they relate to, for example, people who do intention experiments and are able to, like Lynn McTaggart, who was able to get the most violent zip code in the United States, I believe it's in Missouri, to get the violence to decrease by about 40% through intention experiments. And also the UFO and UAP phenomena that's happening where people like Chris Bledsoe are able to, apparently, lots of video and people have gone there, groups of people able to call or call down, as people are referring to it, as these orbs or different craft and so forth.
I think our intention and our desire, it influences what we then, certain people have developed the capacity to demonstrate their psychokinetic ability. And although they may not be able to prove these effects to the degree that scientists might require, I think throughout history, we have this belief that some people have special abilities, that our spirits, souls, life after death, and magical abilities. Some people have magical abilities. Mm-hmm. Others seek help from them, but actually there's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you can figure out what to do to help yourself, then you won't be dependent upon someone else. I've had a chance to collect an awful lot of stories. I'm reminded of a story of a woman who came to me and she said she had been, I forget, some kind of terrible ailment, her heart condition and lung condition and all that. And she'd been to one famous healer and that hadn't worked, and another famous healer hadn't worked, and another famous healer had not been successful. And then one evening she was reading her Bible and the Holy Spirit came and she was healed. Okay. And I thought, that's a wonderful story. She said, well, I'm so angry at all those healers, they're so worthless, and it seems sad. It's as if we're searching for, we have a particular key and we're searching for a particular lock and we want to turn it, search here, but the solution is inside, perhaps, the solution's inside somewhere. It's just a matter of figuring out how to turn the key in the lock.
Yeah.
We aren't really in control. We're not I understand that it's possible to develop. There have been people in my group who have spent years and years and years trying to develop their psychic abilities. And I think they have been somewhat slightly successful. But, within a lot of Buddhist and Hindu traditions, they say, the miracles aren't really what's important. Miracles aren't, there's something so far beyond that the pathway is probably the real important thing.
Right. I think in the yoga tradition, they talk about not getting caught up in the cities that they will develop, but to continue on your spiritual path.
So for the group of people, the enjoyment and the fellowship within the group is what's really important rather than the phenomena.
Yeah, beautiful. One other aspect of this phenomena that happened to you in your room is that this light appeared. Can you tell us about that?
That started out when my wife and I were out of town, and there was a series of lights that came, and they were all different from each other, and they're seemingly inexplicable, and they would flash and vibrate. Oftentimes when we were out of town and the house is empty, it would do things like that. And it also would activate the cameras, but the pinwheels weren't turning. And the light activated the cameras, so that both the cameras were working for some of those lights. And then more recently, we had another light phenomena. Kind of above the altar, there's a bright light that shone, and for that one, there's a blanket over the window, and the blinds are shut. Some of the other ones, the blinds are shut, so you can see the reflection shut. So, it's possible someone snuck in the house somehow. I don't know. But actually, when you open the door, that activates the camera. So we should have been able to see an intruder coming in and doing that. Or maybe someone had a laser shining through the window or something like that. But it would have to be extremely powerful. I'm not sure how to explain it normally. So the lights some people are impressed. Some of our participants are impressed too. I think Boris particularly likes those more recent lights, because there's a kind of magical quality to it.
They seem very peaceful to me. Very beautiful and peaceful.
The phenomenon itself oftentimes responds to to talking about death or to deceased people. And there's been periods where I've been quite doubtful that it would ever come back. It's been, and there was one time, and I wasn't sure of these hypotheses either at the beginning. But I remember there was a period where it seemed like the phenomenon was pretty much dead, and we were meeting anyway. And I happened to mention that it's the anniversary of my brother's death, and the pinwheels started turning very rapid. I thought, whoa, we really must, have something. And so other people say, oh, well, let's call on his spirit, but we weren't able to replicate the phenomenon. And it's activated for Hans Bender and for living people too. Living parapsychologists, some of them, just mentioning their work.
Jim, is there anything else you want to share today about your group online PK experiments?
Well, it's an ongoing experiment, and if a person wants to contact me through email, I certainly will respond.
Great. We can put your email in the description of the video.
Yeah. Right now, we're meeting in the morning on the East Coast, so that because we have participants in Great Britain and also Germany and also People's Republic of China. So we're meeting in the morning, but we could adjust we can adjust to suit a new person, because I'm just curious about what might happen. I must admit, curiosity is a major motivating force.
Of course.
In this research.
Jim, thank you once again for being with me, and thank you for what you're doing and for sharing with us your amazing new study that's been published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration titled An Online Group PK Experiment Hypothesis Testing and Theory Development. Thank you again for being with me today.
Thank you for having me.
And for those of you watching or listening, thank you for being with us, because you are the reason that we are here.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Book 3 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP. Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.